Looking out, it's a great big world. Where do I go? How do I fit in? Gotta keep this one thing on my mind. The maker of all the universe is on my side. And if God is for me, who can be against me? God.
Good morning, boys and girls. It sure is good to be back with you guys again this morning. I hope everyone has had a super good week, gotten to get outside and enjoy all the nice sunshine and have a whole lot of fun. After all, I think it's just about 3 weeks until school is supposed to start up again. So let's all make sure we try to make the most of the little bit of summer that we have left and enjoy summer vacation. Now, as was the case with last week's object lesson, for this week's object lesson, it will once again be helpful if you have just a little bit of money as you kind of follow along. Now again, it doesn't matter how much money you have or even what kind of money you have. A penny will work as good as a dollar, and a dime will work just as good as a $5 bill. And remember, the money isn't for buying anything or isn't for giving in an offering. The money is really just for you to be able to look at it. Because as we began to see last week, our money really does have some important spiritual or Bible or religious lessons, whatever you want to call it. Our money has some pretty good lessons that it can teach us. And what I'm specifically talking about are some important words that are on almost all of our money. In fact, most of our money has 2 important phrases on it. One of the phrases was the phrase that we looked at last week, which is, "In God we trust." In God we trust. This week, we are going to look at the other phrase on most of our money, and that phrase is a very strange sounding phrase, E pluribus unum. E pluribus unum. And yes, I actually said that right. E pluribus unum, which hopefully is going to be appearing on the bottom of your screen that you're watching right now. And as you will see in just a second, E pluribus unum really is on most of our money. Let's take a look at that right now. So as you can see, E pluribus unum really is on our money. But what in the world does E pluribus unum mean? Well, let me begin by pointing out to you, if you aren't familiar with those words, there's actually a pretty good reason why. And that is the fact that the words of E pluribus unum are not English language words, but they are Latin language words. And Latin is a very, very, very old language that highly educated, super smart people like scholars and university professors in long ago times, they used Latin to communicate in and corresponded. They would write each other letters in Latin. And it just so happens that many of our nation's founding fathers, folks like George Washington and Thomas Jefferson and James Madison, were some of those super smart people who were skilled in the Latin language. that helps us to kind of understand why so many Latin phrases appear in some of our nation's earliest documents, and why on so many statues and plaques that are in old buildings, there are old government buildings, there are Latin phrases that are written upon them. And interestingly enough, one of the phrases that they used an awful lot when they talked about or wrote about the United States was this phrase, E pluribus unum. So what in the world does E pluribus unum actually mean? Well, the letter E in the Latin language is actually a word. There was a word that they used, and it was just the letter E, and what the letter E meant was from or out of. From or out of. The second word in the phrase is pluribus, which means many. Some of you guys who take English classes in school already are likely familiar with the English word plural, which is used to describe something that you have more than one of. Well, the English word plural is based on the Latin word pluribus. You can kind of hear it, plural, pluribus. And pluribus simply means many. And of course, unum is the Latin word for one, like the number one. And so when you put all that together, what E pluribus unum means is out of many, one. Out of the many comes one. So what is that really talking about? Well, that little phrase can be applied to our United States in a couple of different ways. Now, one way to think about E pluribus unum is to think about while we have many separate states in our country, all those separate states come together to form one nation. Now, originally there were 13 states, 13 colonies. Remember, you had Georgia, and you had Virginia, and you had Maryland, and you had New York, and you had all those original 13 states. And those 13 states, 13 colonies came together to form one nation. Out of the many colonies came one nation. Now today when we think about it, of course we have far more than 13 states today. States just kept getting added in as time went on. Tennessee was the 16th state to be added in, and so now there's 50 of them, and so now you still have E pluribus unum. Out of the many, out of the 50 states, comes one nation. And so, and of course, for our nation to be a great nation, what has to happen? All 50 of those states have to remain united and work together for the good of the overall country. And so that's one way to think about E pluribus unum. Out of the many states comes one nation. But that's not the only way that some of the founding fathers viewed E pluribus unum. For some of the ancient people, this is going all the way back into times when the Latin language was the actual language of the day. This idea of E pluribus unum wasn't viewed in terms of things like states, but individual people. And for the folks who view it that way, when they hear E pluribus unum, what they have in mind is how in the United States you have all of these different people, or all these different kinds of people, who come together to form one nation. And you know, that's really true too. Because when our nation started, you know, we already had people living in America who were from all over the world. We had the Native Americans who were already here. We had folks who had come from Europe, and we had folks who had come from Asia, and we had folks who had come from Africa, and we had folks who came in from South America. And Today, we still have all those people from all over the world, and out of those many people, out of the many, comes the nation that we call the United States of America. And you know, when you stop and you think about it, just like all the states have to work together and do their part and cooperate for our nation to be a great nation, so also do all the people of the United States, all of our citizens, need to do the same thing. We all have an important role to play in making our nation a great nation. There are things that all of us need to do over the course of our lives. You know, we all need to vote, and we all pay taxes. There's all these things that we as citizens need to do to make our nation great. So out of the many citizens, out of the many different kinds of people, comes one nation. And by the way, our founding fathers thought the idea of a pluribus unum was so important that way back in 1776, the same year that they signed the Declaration of Independence, they also did something else. They made e pluribus unum our national motto. That's how important these words were to them. And you say, okay, Brother Russ, that's kind of interesting. But what is the spiritual lesson? What is the religious lesson? What is the church, the kind of Bible lesson that we can take home from this phrase that is on all of our money? Well, it comes from the fact that when you stop and you think about it, you realize that what is true of the United States is also very, very true for our church. For our church is also made up of many different kinds of people. We have older people at our church, and we have younger people at our church. We have men and we have women. We have boys and we have girls. And we have people whose national origins come from all over the world, people who are from nationally from Europe or Asia or Africa and all the places in between. We have all these different kinds of people at our church. But in spite of how different we all are in many ways, when we come here, we come together to form one church out of those many different kinds of people. And that really is pretty much the idea of e pluribus unum. And by the way, the idea that e pluribus unum communicates, out of the many comes one, is actually an idea that the Bible teaches also. Think about what the Apostle Paul says about the church in 1 Corinthians chapter 12, and I begin reading in verse 12. The Apostle Paul writes, "The human body has many parts, but the many parts make up one whole body." You remember, hear what he just said? Out of the many comes one. That's e pluribus unum. He goes on and he says, "So it is with the church or body of Christ. Some of us are Jews, some are Gentiles, some are slaves, and some are free. But we have all been baptized into one body by one Spirit, and we all share the same Spirit. Yes, the body has many different parts, not just one part. If the foot says, 'I am not a part of the body because I am not a hand,' that does not make it any less a part of the body. And if the ear says, 'I am not part of the body because I am not an eye,' would that make it any less a part of the body? If the whole body were an eye, how would you hear? Or if your whole body was an ear. Could you imagine if your whole body, if you were just a great big giant ear that was walking around? Or if your whole body were an ear, how would you smell anything? But our bodies have many parts, and God has put each part just where He wants it. How strange a body would be if it only had one part. Yes, there are many parts, but only one body. The eye can never say to the hand, I don't need you. The head can't say to the feet, I don't need you. In fact, some parts of the body that seem weakest and least important are actually the most necessary. And the parts we regard as less honorable are those we clothe with the greatest care. So we carefully protect those parts that should not be seen. And while the more honorable parts do not require this special care, but God has put the body together such that extra honor and care are given to those parts that have less dignity. This makes for harmony among the members, so that all the members care for each other. If one part suffers, all the parts suffer with it. And if one part is honored, all the parts are glad. All of you together are Christ's body, and each of you is part of it. Do you understand what the Apostle Paul just said? He's saying, E pluribus unum. Out of the many parts, one body is formed. He's saying, E pluribus unum. Out of the many members, one church is formed. And so our second lesson from money is the E pluribus unum lesson, which reminds us that it takes many different people to form a great church. And what that does is it points out to us how each and every person in a church really is important. Because God has placed that person there, and God has special things that that person can do to help that church become all that God wants it to be. And so, boys and girls, what that means is this. E pluribus unum. Out of the many comes one. And if each one of the members of our church, including you guys, if we all come together to do our part, what a great, great church we will continue to have. Well, boys and girls, that's our lesson for this week. E pluribus unum. Out of the many comes one. Hope to see you guys real soon.
If God is for me, who can be against me? God